Hey guys, and welcome to another tutorial. This is your host John Grand for Freshly Squeezed Samples, and today I'm going to be showing you how to produce a progressive house song in under an hour. Now, I do want to state that this video has already a lot of the groundwork laid out. I've already set up my arrangement, I've set up my buses, I've also set up my sends, meaning that this video will probably be a little bit faster than completing it in under an hour. But the reason I've set all this up is so that we can get past the arrangement phase and just start working straight into the mix. I also want to point out that I've selected a few MIDI that is going to be the basis and the foundation for this track. These MIDIs are actually from a preset bank that I made a long time ago for another freshly squeezed sample company that was called Sample Foundry a few years ago, and that was for the Future Progressive series. I also want to state that this video is going to be covering a style of progressive house that's more so in line of artists like Eric Prydz, Jeremy Allender, and those types of artists. So this progressive style that we typically call future progressive is what we're going to focus on. So let's go ahead and get started. But first, let's listen to what we currently have. I've set up my effects. I've also set up my kick, because I know exactly where the kicks are going to go based on the arrangement of this song. As you can see, we start off with about 16 bars of an intro, then it goes into a build, then it's going to go into like the verse section, then we have like the nice little bridge or middle eight section, or breakdown as we call it, and then we have a chorus that goes into a build, the verse, and then outro, and then the end of the song. So let's go ahead and start getting this song built up. Now, as I mentioned before, I do have a couple of bass lines set up. So let me go ahead and pull up a MIDI right here for the basses and kind of experiment with the sound that I'm going to go for. Great, so the sound that I've chosen is actually a sound from a freshly squeezed sample bank. And it's actually one of my favorite ones that I use even to this day, but you can find this one under the Freshly Squeezed Samples Silent Definitive Collection. It's labeled as Bass 084, and this is a great bass because it just has a lot of tonality, and it's really one that you can shape and create some pretty basic rhythms and sounds with very quickly. So let's go ahead and hear how that sounds. So what I've done there is I've essentially just raised the release a little bit on the envelopes. The bass was a little bit too stiff, so by turning that up, it gives it a little bit more release, a little bit more decay. And I think right around there is the sweet spot. So let's go ahead and layer this bass with another bass and see what that sounds like. I'm going to choose a different sound. Digging that. I'm going to do a little bit of an EQ. Going to take out some of the lows on this bass specifically so that there's a little bit of contrast with these two basses, so that this one has a little bit more of a high taste and this one has a little bit more of a low end taste. Great. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in an arpeggio that's going to be the main melodic for this track, or at least the main lead line or arpeggiated line. For this one, I am going to also use another instance of Silent. Now again, any synth that you choose is really going to be up to taste. There is no right or wrong way to do this. It's really all up to however you want to approach your track. Definitely digging that sound. Let's try another one. I'm going to bring this down an octave because I do feel like it's a little too high. Then I'm going to add some delay to it just to kind of give that synth a little bit more energy. Nice little ping pong delay. Now, one thing we can do to this guy right here is we can add an arpeggiator. And what I'm going to do is, instead of using a traditional arpeggiator, I'm actually going to use the chord trigger, which is going to sound something like this. So that sound right there is kind of giving you that 16th pattern of a arpeggiated sequence, but with a chord trigger. So instead of it doing a typical arpeggiated pattern, something like this, it's going to be chord triggering. Let's go ahead and hear how that sounds in context. Yeah, so far I'm digging that. Let's go ahead and, for the sake of this video, I'm just going to freeze this because I don't want it to have that decay every single time that I click pause or stop. That way it'll be a little bit easier for you to hear what I'm talking about and what I'm doing. But if you're not familiar with what freezing does in Ableton, this basically what it does is it records your MIDI pattern into an audio file. So for instance, if I were to click on this, and if you're on Windows, it would be Control click, or if you're on Mac, it would be Command click. Simply drag it down, and there you can actually see the print of your MIDI. So that's a pretty good starting point. Let's go ahead and add a pad. And the pad that I believe that Eric Prydz uses quite a bit is going to be from this synth right here, the Selena. Now, you don't have to own this specific plugin to do what we're going to do next. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how to create that same exact sound with a tool like Serum. But first, I need to figure out what the notes are. So it looks like this song is in the key of B minor. So I'm going to create a simple pad that is going to follow that bass line. So let's go ahead and solo the bass and the pad first and start building it. So right there, I've done essentially what is called like a 3-octave key or chord. So I've done B2, B3, B4, and then I've inserted like a minor note, which in this case is D. And that creates that sound which you hear a lot in a lot of Eric Prydz's tracks. And I'm actually going to turn off the sidechain. And for the sidechain, I'm just using a simple LFO tool sidechain. The curve pattern isn't anything super crazy, but it is very useful for putting that throughout your track so that you can get that nice sidechain sound. But I'm going to turn the sidechain off. One thing to note with LFO tool is if the sidechain is a little too strong, one thing you can do is you can play with this volume knob right here. So check this out. I'm going to solo the kick and this right here. I think the key to really good sidechaining is to almost not hear the fact that it's being sidechained. Whenever things are pumping a little bit too much, it ends up sounding a little bit amateurish in my opinion. So what I like to do is I like to bring the amount of the sidechain down just a tad so that it is still sidechaining, but it's not so obvious that the person can hear that heavy ducking effect. Now there's certain styles of music where that does make sense, where you want to do a lot of that ducking, but in this case we're just going to do it a little bit. And it just sounds a little smoother, in my opinion as well. Let's do it on the bass too. All right, so now we're going to create another track with the strings that are similar to that Selena sound. And bear with me because my serum is going to be ginormous right now. I typically don't record videos at 1080p since my monitor is a ultra wide. So I'm going to bring serum down to about, I think 125%, no, 110%, so that you can see it a little better. Hopefully that's easier for you to see. But we're going to recreate that Selena sound with serum. So let's go ahead and try this out real quick. And all this is doing is just adding an extra layer so that they sound a little bit more stringy. I'm going to go into the mix a little bit, doing a couple of little things here, but essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be setting up the stage for these mid basses, right? And this is so that we can separate them from the sub basses. I'm actually going to drag those in right now and get those sub basses at a place where it feels good. One of the tricks that I like to do is whenever I'm trying to get my sub basses to sit nicely with the kick is I look at how much the meter is hitting on my kick. So in this case, it says that my meter is going to be hitting at minus 11.6. So if the sub over here is hitting at a similar volume, that's usually not what we want. We want this to be about 8 to 60 dBs lower than the kick. So I'm going to keep dragging this down, these two basses that I have, these two sub basses. One is a sine wave and one is a saw wave. I'm going to keep dragging these down until they get to about minus 19, because that's about 8 dB of difference, right? And right around there is the sweet spot. That's kind of where I want my basses to start off for now. Once we get down to the mixing stage, we can kind of have a better idea of where we want those basses to sit. But for now, we're just going to keep them there, and I think that's a good starting point. Let's go ahead and listen to our mid bass, which is at 140 hertz or so. So as you can see there, the mid bass, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get rid of that second octave. This is the first octave. Sorry, we're trying to get to the first octave, not the second one. We're trying to let the bass sit, this mid bass, around the second octave. Which in this case is right around here at 123 hertz. And we don't want this bass overlapping with our sub bass because that's going to create muddiness. Now we've basically mixed this mid bass with the sub bass, so that way they have their own separate frequencies. And it just sounds a lot cleaner, right? Whenever you have those two groups mixed differently, the sub bass and the mid bass, you get a better sense of a mix pretty early on. The bass is sitting somewhere really nice right there, so I'm pretty happy with that for now. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to adding some more elements. I am gonna check out which midis we have. So it looks like I have a lead that I can use. So let's go ahead and bring that in probably to the second half of this verse section. So I'm just gonna copy this over, and then I'm gonna start bringing in a lead right here that's gonna sound very similar to like an Eric Prydz lead. So right here, I'm going to paste this in here. and I'm going to pick a preset that is called Prydz, which is one that I made for the Sample Foundry Future Progressive Volume 1, which you can find this preset bank on Freshly Squeezed Samples. Let's go ahead and listen to what that sounds like. I'm digging that. Now it's time to add some drums. Now, one thing that I like to point out about drums is I like to have all of my drums separated into their own channels. And what this does is it lets me add in a bunch of different snares all together. And it also lets me add in essentially as many sounds as I want to. And I can rotate through them. So let's go ahead and check out what that looks like. So right here, I'm going to add in the snare. And then let's go ahead and build a simple snare pattern. So right there, as you can see, I can layer a bunch of different snares together if I wanted to. I think in this case, what I might do is I do like this snare down here, so I'm going to do something like this. Then let's add in some hi-hats. One of the things that Prydz does a lot is this style of hi-hat that kind of goes something like this. Then we can start adding in some open hi-hats that are going to come in probably over here. We want those first few bars to kind of be more about the anticipation of the energy that's going to come later. I think that's one of the key things about progressive in this style is really just not coming in full force, but little by little adding in elements to sort of build up anticipation, to build in excitement. Cool. So now that we have some of that stuff laid out, I'm going to go ahead and copy some of this over to the chorus because I know that Eric Prydz typically likes to bring in his drums pretty quickly whenever there's like a drop or a chorus or something like that. So I'm just going to assume that this is going to happen over here. One other thing I'm going to do is copy over the pads because these are going to be going throughout pretty much the entire song with the exception of a couple little parts here and there. So right about here is where I would think someone like Eric Prydz would start probably changing their bass line a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select all of these tracks or all these MIDI clips and start editing the bass pattern. So what I think I'm going to do is play around a little bit with some of these notes and see what happens. We're going to have to fix these notes. So I think that's a good little spot to kind of maybe start venturing into the breakdown or the bridge, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to create another group, which is going to be a baseline for just the breakdown. And this method of separating everything keeps your tracks really clean, and you can focus on each section and not have to worry about, well, did I do the automation correctly on this area over here, or do I need to change something? So it just keeps your tracks really clean. Now, of course, it will clutter up your session a little bit, but at least with this way, you have the visibility and the clarity of what you're doing and what's happening where, and you don't have to open up a bunch of stuff to know where did you go and do something and you can't remember it later. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in Serum again, and we're gonna create a sort of like a restyled bass, something really simple that is just gonna give us that element of that breakdown style bass that you hear a lot in tracks like well, pretty much any Eric Prydz tracks, really. So let's go ahead and bring in a bass that is probably going to be something like this. Let's see what this sounds like. That sounds good, but for the purposes of this video, let's go ahead and just create one from scratch so that we can kind of get the hang of learning how to sound design our own sounds, and that just gives you so much more control over your future productions. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about what I'm doing, but hopefully it should be very easy to understand based on the visuals of what I'm doing. There we created like a nice little simple bass. That's going to be our breakdown bass. So I'm going to call this bass breakdown. Add this over here. And let's get this guy going. I'm going to bring in those little arpeggios that we had because they sound really nice in the breakdown. Out of our 8 bars, we're going to cut the note and change it up. And let's go ahead and play with some of those notes for a bit. One real quick note, I'm just going to be automating the sidechain to be turned off during the breakdown. It'll look something like this. Now, one thing that Eric Prydz does a lot, and honestly a lot of producers do this, but it's to sort of add these little moments in between notes that kind of create a little bit of diversion from the standard notes that we're playing previously. So let's go ahead and try something out right here. So it'll sound like this. So that's sounding pretty cool so far. Let's go ahead and add some chords to this breakdown. I think that this is something that Eric would do. And there's a really simple way to do this. I've shown this before in a couple of videos in the past, but the best way to do this is to open any synthesizer that has an arpeggiator. In this instance, I'm going to use Spire because it's just really quick and easy to do. But I'm going to go ahead and first copy the bass line progression. And this is going to be the foundation for the chords that I'm going to make in a second. So let's go ahead and set up the synthesizer. We're going to go first to the arpeggiator. We're going to turn that on. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the mode into chord mode. And then we're going to just play that back and hear how it sounds. We're going to change the voices to about 16 because we're going to be stacking this chord quite a bit, and with more voices you'll be able to get the sound to shine the way you want it to. So now it's time to start building these chords. Now the way I approach creating chords like this is really by starting out with the bass line. There's no real secret or technique to this. I'm not the most classically trained or music theory expert by any means. So what I like to do is I just like to play around and just see what happens. One of the first things I'll do though when I'm trying to create a chord out of a progression like this is I will try to create an octave first. So let me go ahead and get this octave up to B3, and then I will do one more octave of that and another B. So right there, that's sort of like the first step. So let's hear what that sounds like. Pretty simple, right? Nothing too crazy. Now, this is the fun part where we start adding in other chords to sort of blend into this existing progression pattern. So again, I'm just gonna try out a couple of different things and see what happens. There isn't any real or there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's really just up to however you want to go about testing these chord progressions and just kind of, getting a feel for where it's going to go. So let's go ahead and try that out. I'm actually going to bring this down an octave. I'm also going to turn off the sidechain for this section because we don't need it in the breakdown. You can, but I don't want to use the sidechain. Let's go ahead and bring a couple more voices into the synth. Cool, so we got those first few notes going. Let's go ahead and bring another layer of notes and see what we can get out of it. One thing I forgot to mention too, if you did want to use the scale, in this case, this track is in B minor, we can look at the scale, and the notes that are highlighted are the ones that are going to be the recommended ones, right? So obviously that one didn't work. Those ones are working. I personally don't really like using the scale, but some people do, and it can be helpful. So there's a note that's wrong there. So let's fix that. Another one that we got to fix there. And there we've set up the chord progression, so we know that it's going to be repeating. So I'm just going to go ahead and consolidate all those notes. But as you can see there, that's like a really simple way to set up a chord progression without having a whole lot of knowledge of music theory. Is it better to learn how to do that? Absolutely. But, you know, it's just fun to experiment and not really know what you're doing and getting some really cool results. I think at this point right here, we can start bringing in those mid basses to kind of build the track a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring those guys in right here. And that's already such a great start into our drop, right? Or our chorus, however you want to call it. We got like a really good layout of the song. We know what's going to happen. And since we already know what's going to happen, I'm going to go ahead and copy these guys and just get ahead of the curve and just start adding them here because I know that my outro is going to have the same section as this. Now, one of the things I want to add into this track is a sample because that is something that Eric Prydz does a lot. He loves to bring in vocal samples. So let's go ahead and enter into some vocal samples that our good friend Dave Parkinson has made for Freshly Squeezed Samples. He's got some amazing sample packs. I highly recommend you check them out. One of my favorite ones right now is this one called the Dave Parkinson Progressive Essentials. There's some really cool vocal loops, synth stabs, all kinds of stuff that you can use in your productions. Let's go ahead and open up a vocal sample and see what we can get. So right off the bat, that one could be a really cool one for the breakdown, so let's add that in. I'm going to go ahead and add that to my atmospheric reverb, and all I'm using for my atmospheric reverb is a tool that I love to use called the Arts Acoustic Reverb. This is a very high quality reverb that creates very long and trancey styled decays. Highly recommend it. If you want to hear how it sounds like, let me give you a quick preview. It sounds something like this. and then with it off, you know. It's nice. It's a very good reverb, and I love using this on just about all my tracks. Now, one thing we can do too, and I've done this here, is I've created a small little chain for the vocals to have a really long decayed styled delay. And what I've done is I've added an OTT, which stands for over the top compressor, and you can use the Ableton preset, and there's also a X4 Records plugin for this, which is also really great. And I'm going to use it here because I think it's going to sound really cool. So let's give it a listen. One thing that, sorry about the delay there. One thing that Eric does a lot too is he'll down pitch a lot of vocals. So let's go ahead and try that out on this one. We have this one kind of high right here, but let's bring it down a whole octave. That one right there is definitely a winner. Let's try that one. I'm just copying and pasting a few things. That sounds pretty cool. Whenever I have any type of sound that's going to have a lot of reverb and decay like that, what I like to do is I like to print it. So what I've done here is I've created a channel that's just called sample recording, and I'm just recording all of these right here. So let's go ahead and record that because that'll give us more control than just letting the plugin do its thing. So I'm going to go ahead and record this, and it should be done in a little bit. Got that one recorded. Let's do the next one. Let's do the next one. One thing I'm doing here is I click stop a lot so that it just cuts off the tail of the reverb, and then I can record again. As you can tell here, I'm kind of trying to separate them all. And there we have it. Now we got those recordings, and what we can do now is basically get rid of these, and then we can use these for something else later. But now we have the actual reverb tails, and we can control them a little bit. I'm going to EQ some of these because I'm guessing there's a lot of low end. And probably a lot of high end too, so I'm going to take some of that out. And that worked out pretty nice. Let's go ahead and play the track and see what we have so far. I'm going to bring in some of the effects. So there you have it. I mean, that's sort of like a nice little layout for the song. Let's go ahead and bring in a couple more elements. One of the things I want to add in is a nice rising effect. I think that's something that Eric always does really well. And I haven't quite mastered how he does his risers, but I'm assuming he does them manually, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I like using Spire for this because it's just very simple to do. But one of the things you want to focus on is you want to have the bender at 24 going up, and then you're going to want to automate the pitch wheel. So let's go ahead and set that up, and then click configure in Ableton, so this guy, and then up, and then now we have the bend wheel ready. And let's go ahead and write in the MIDI, and in this case the song is in B minor, so I'm assuming we're going to go from B minor up to the chorus. And let's go ahead and set the automation stage. So we're going to be bending up from here to 100, or 1 I should say, from 50% to 100%. And I'm going to create some voicing on this, so bear with me as I play around. Now, if I recall correctly, I think what Eric does with a lot of his tracks is he'll actually keep that note going for a little bit, and I think he even sidechains it once the kick comes in. So let's go ahead and copy over one of these automation lines, like this one right here, for the LFO tool. And that way, when the song, or when the drop kicks in, I should say, the note will stay up there and it'll start sidechaining. Yeah, so once that part kicks in, what we're going to do is just turn down the volume automation. I like using a gain knob like this. Just start bringing it down a little bit so it's not too distracting. We're going to create another instance of this because I think he does this as well, where he'll set up multiple stages of a rising effect like this. And we're going to need to do the automation on that, of course. So let's start this one from here and have it go like this. So we have the first riser starting here, the second riser starting here, and the volume automations and everything are the same. For this one, I might add a little bit of delay. So I'm going to bring up the delay and do like an 1/8 and a 1/16. And I actually need to fix the delay on this one as well because this one has that really fast delay, which I don't need. So let's go ahead and see what that sounds like. That's sounding pretty good. Let's go ahead and add in some other effect that he likes to do a lot in his tracks. And that's what we typically call like a big room snare. It's going to sound something like this. So he's going to do like a little ba ba, like right here, I would think. Something wrong with this line right here. Gonna bring those down a little bit. I want to add some extra percussion to this part because the drop should be a little bit more energetic, obviously, than the rest of the song, because that's sort of the peak. And let's go ahead and bring in some percussion from our good friend Dave's pack. Let's see if we can get some. I'm just going to drag and drop a bunch of these and hope for the best. Let's see what happens. And I'm probably going to be doing like a really basic 16th pattern with these percussions. Nothing too crazy. So let's go ahead and set this to 16th. Bring one of these down like this one a little bit higher. And all I'm doing here with the velocity is I'm just trying to give these drums a little bit of variation on the percussion side. Let's go ahead and loop that. There we go. So we got the percussion there. Let's go ahead and label this percussion. Can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that you're labeling everything as you go. It just keeps your tracks so much cleaner and a lot more effective later on when you're trying to play them back. Now you may have been wondering, when are we going to get to the part where I'm just going to freeze these tracks over here so that we don't have to hear them every time I stop. But when are we going to get to the part where we start doing reverbs? Well, this is that part of the video where I'm going to start separating and creating reverb rooms or different spaces. And what this does is it allows us to set up different staging for the listener so that they don't think that everything is happening in the same space. So what I like to do is I like to set up 4 different short reverbs, or as I call them, room reverbs or whatever. And with each one of these reverbs, they're going to be having a different decay time. So if you were using FabFilter Pro R or any other reverb for that matter, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be setting each one of these at a different decay. So this one is 0.075 seconds. Let's check out this reverb, what I have it at. This one's at 0.50, so this is a shorter reverb. The decay rate will bring that down. This one is at 0.25, so this is a really, really short reverb. And then finally we have this one, which is at a bit of a longer reverb, about 3 seconds. I might bring that down to about 1.2 or something like that. And I'm going to show you why this is helpful. Now, if you listen to the drums, it doesn't really sound like there's a whole lot of depth or space, right? So if we wanted to create, for instance, the hi-hats, we want to give that hi-hat a little bit more of like a closed room reverb. Let's bring that one to this one and turn this one up right here. It just kind of gives it a little bit extra air. Let's try it out with the percussion. I'm going to put that one to our room reverb 4. Don't like that one, so let's try a different one. Digging that one. Let's see what this one sounds like. I think that's the best one. For the open hat, let's try a different room reverb. I like that. And so, what you're doing is you're just creating more room and space. And then if you ever wanted to print these reverbs, there's a way to do that, which I can show you later. But if we print these reverbs, it'll give us more control over mixing and a ton of other stuff, right? And with all these reverbs, while they do come with EQs and all this kind of stuff, I always just prefer to just write in, or at least bring in my own EQ for each one so that I know what I'm cutting. We can do the same thing with the snare. We can add a little bit of room reverb to the snare. We can do the same thing with the basses. Generally speaking, you want to add more of the room reverb to a higher end bass. So in this case, this is the one that has a bit of more of a higher end sound. And with these guys here, I think I'm going to cut out some of the lows because there's a little bit too much. Same thing with these guys. One thing I forgot to do was to add the sidechain on this bass. So it looks like we got it there now. And this bass we also need to EQ. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to automate this, right? So I'm going to have this EQ only come on when the drop happens. And I'm going to do a cut at about 90 hertz, maybe 120. I think there's still some room for me to add in another bass on this drop, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to put that on this guy here. And I'm going to go for a nice re-space. And there's a preset that I really like that Splice has called BA Flume Reese. Just has a really good sound. You can download that from Splice. Let's go ahead and hear what that sounds like. I'm actually going to copy these bass notes because those are the... Digging that. Let's go ahead and also bring in our sub basses, which for whatever reason I forgot to add in. So let's go ahead and bring those sub basses together and hear how that really sounds nice and full now. Cool. Last thing I want to do is I want to bring in a little bit of more tops during that drop. So I'm going to open up some percussion or some hi-hat loops from Dave. Maybe one of these could work nice. Let's try them out. Let's see. I dig that one, so I'm going to copy that, keep that in the drop. And actually we can bring that in halfway, it doesn't have to come in right away. Turn that down a little bit. And I'm going to bring in another set of effects just to kind of really give that chorus a little bit extra oomph, as they say. Maybe a nice little white noise washer like this. Might be too loud, but let's go ahead and... That one's got a little bit too much delay effect. Maybe something like that could work. Let's turn off the warping. Just moving the crashes around a little bit. We can bring our risers back in. Let's go ahead and flatten these and get the audio printed. And I'm going to bring these guys over here, I think, to this section. And take that snare roll out and bring these basses in right here. So that's sounding pretty cool so far. The last thing I want to do in this video is just show you some basic automation tricks to get your track to not sound so stagnant the whole time. So one simple way to do this is to load in a tool such as the Endless Smile. This is a very simple and effective tool that lets you create these really big rising effects that just add a lot of energy, and it's the kind of stuff that you would hear at a club normally, or if a DJ is dropping into a pretty big track, they're going to be using this type of effect. So we can add this in two places. We can either add it on the master channel, which, by the way, my master channel really doesn't have anything other than just a bunch of gain knobs, one just to kind of bring the levels up, one for automation on the overall track. As you can see here, before every major section, I kind of bring the volume down just a tad. Well, this is the stereo width, but in here, right, for instance, you can see that I bring the gain down just a little bit right before the drop hit, so it's doing like a little. And all that's doing is it's just bringing the drop into a place where it's just going to sound a lot bigger when you drop the volume down just a tad bit. And that's also something that you can do DJing live too, right? You can kind of bring the gain knob a little bit right before the drop kicks in and then bring it back to where back to zero. But let's go ahead and do some automation to the Endless Smile, which is going to be, for this video, I'm going to show you how to do it on the master. Typically, I prefer to use this on the individual channels, so what I'll do is I'll create a bunch of copies of it. But for the sake of making this video shorter, I'm just going to show you how to do it like this. So we have it on the master. Now we're just going to bring in the Endless Smile into this section right here, and you'll hear what that sounds like. So right there, you could hear it on that section. Let's bring it over before the drop right here. Now, I will say that the problem with using it this way is that if you do have like a snare that's doing something like this, you're not going to be able to hear it with the Endless Smile. So that's why I typically, what I'll do is, I can write it all, I can write everything here, and then what I'll do is I'll just copy this. I'll copy a bunch of instances of it, and then I'll bring it into the channels, like, all these basses or these chords or whatever. And that way I just kind of have like a good layout for where I think that these instances of the Endless Smile are going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this and start pasting it to each group. So on the subs, on the mids, on the breakdown. And sometimes when you have this many instances of it, it kind of creates an even more washy effect because you're multiplying the effect by however many times you're copying and pasting it, you know. In this case, I'm just going to bring all these guys like this. And let's see what that sounds like. So that's sounding pretty good. The last thing we need to do is just get the intro and the outro sorted. So let's go ahead and copy and paste some of these drum elements. Typically, it's better not to have a lot of melodics at the intro of a track like this so that the DJ that's mixing in your track can just have a nice clean sound of percussion. Usually anywhere between the first 16 bars is good. And don't necessarily need these hi-hats, so let's keep it nice and simple. Let's start bringing in the basses maybe around here. What I would do here is I would use something like an EQ3, which is basically like a DJ EQ. And I'm setting up the automation this way because I actually don't like to have the EQ3 on throughout the entire track. I like to only have it on when I'm using it. That's mainly because it has a weird sound that it just doesn't sound good when it's on all the time. One thing you can do here too, if you want, is add some reverb so that it kind of has like a bit of a washy effect before it's coming in. So let's go ahead and add a simple Ableton reverb right here. And we're just going to be automating the wet on it. And I'm also going to have this off when it's not being used. So we can automate it like this and bring it down like this. Honestly, I kind of like the reverb on, so I think I'm going to leave it on for a little bit longer, maybe do something like this. One thing I want to point out too is that if you're creating a track with an extended mix like this for people to DJ, one thing that I always find really helpful is to cut off these kicks at every 16 bars or so by 1 bar, because what that does is it lets the DJ kind of see on their mixer that you know, that's where they're counting each section of your song. And again, it's not something you have to do, but I like doing it because I think it gives people that visual guide. Okay, this next section of the song is going to come in because he cut out the kick there, boom. And then he knows that this right here is probably where he's going to start mixing his your song into their song if they're doing a fast transition. And then they'll have a lot of ample time to work with all that. So let's go ahead and hear what that sounds like. then the key part here is really just trying to get this section to glue into where the first drop is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a few more transitional effects elements that's going to really glue that part together. And that's really the key to putting a lot of these sections with each other, is just to bring in just a lot of effects loops. And so we can try something like an upsweep here. See if something like this would work. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It all comes down to taste and just trying things out until it works. We definitely need an impact there, so something like this would work. Maybe we can bring that vocal sample, turn off the sidechain, at least on that part. One thing that these basses I think need is a little bit of delay, so let's go ahead and add some delay. I like using Echo Boy personally. You can use any delay that you want, but I just like the way it sounds. We want to make sure that the echo is before the sidechain. I'm going to add also a little bit of saturation to these basses because I think it could use it. And saturation is just really adding extra harmonics, which is a nice way of saying we're just adding more color and frequency to the signal. So let's see what it sounds like without saturation. And then I'm also going to do a little amount of automation on the overall tone of the bass so that we can cut out some of the highs. And this is just to add contrast to your basses. And you can use this with any instrument virtually, but in this case, I kind of want it to sound a little bit more like this. A little bit more cut. cutting out some of the highs on this synth. And there you have it, folks. That's how to create a track or a progressive house song in the style of Eric Prydz in under an hour. Now, obviously, we went over an hour and 21 minutes, but if I wasn't explaining and going through and showing you everything, it would have been a lot shorter. But, the whole purpose of this video is to just show you that you don't have to be stuck in an endless 17-bar loop. I hope you learned a lot from this video. The main thing is just to remember to arrange your songs early on, have your effects set up. If you know what you're going to do, then you can add other effects right away as well. And just have your MIDI ideas ready, have any chord progressions that you want ready, and just experiment and have fun. At the end of the day, producing is not impossible to do. It's not the most difficult thing in the world. Does it take time? Sure. Is this track 100% done? No, it's not, but it is at a state where if you wanted to share it with someone else, or if you wanted to kind of present it as a demo and get feedback, this is a pretty good starting point for that. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you had a great time watching this, if you learned a lot, please leave us a comment or a like, and don't forget to subscribe. And I look forward to making more of these for you.